You're listening to Eyes on the Ground. I'm Slade Ham, comedian, writer, explorer. I'll be your host. Stand-up comedy is my medium. It's certainly what I know best. We tend to give ourselves these labels and then operate as if we're bound to them, as if we can't wander over to other playgrounds. I can't do that. I'm this. And the reality is that many of the building blocks are exactly the same, and once you learn them, you can apply everything to everything else. Chingo Bling built a successful hip-hop persona and an enviable social media following. He's collaborated with artists including Mike Jones, Paul Wall, Fat Pat, and Pitbull. And the success of his YouTube channel led him to the stand-up stage, which is where I first met him. It's important to note that he didn't come to stand-up comedy expecting instant success. I watched him start at the same open mics as everyone else until he got his feet firmly underneath him. The difference was, he had already spent an entire career learning skills that he realized applied to stand-up. Deciding to do something new doesn't mean you have to start at zero. We begin as I asked Chingo Bling how he goes about choosing the content he produces.
The way I think now is basically like, okay, there's a endless amount of angles where I could hit people over the head with quote unquote content. You know, there could be a voiceover of a infomercial. I could do a character on green screen. I could do topical, something about Tiger King, blah, 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 you know, a podcast. And I have to kind of like look at the analytics and be like, all right, not only what's sustainable, like what kind of video or show or thing can I do it on a timely like weekly, like some kind of timely.
That is a big consideration, because I think sometimes some people have fantastic ideas and it'll have legs for 3 or 4 episodes and they burn out very, very quickly. It's, I'm going to do these 30-minute episodics. Well, you could have done 100 3-minute episodics, but instead you got these 2 things. That's a big deal to consider.
It's wisdom. Like, it's very wise what you just said, which is, burnout, keyword. God. Dude, I was so burnt out in my rap days, and hindsight is 2020. So I'm like, bro, it was a recession. You got into a failing, like an industry where it's like, dude, I don't know how you're going to jujitsu your way out of. Record stores are shutting down. The CD is looking ancient day by day. It's all about files and file sharing or whatever. You know, the ringtone looks promising, but it's gone. A new phone came out and that's it.
Like that.
My point is, sometimes you can have somewhat of a plan because you gotta have somewhat of a plan. But as we have learned, you can only plan so much. So I say that to say this. Although you do have to be diligent about like production costs and, it's got to be sustainable. You don't want to burn out, but also you have to leave a little bit of room for improvisation and just for it to flow organically, meaning you're going to have iterations. Like, let's just say you're going to do a Facebook live stream. Every time you do it, you might tweak or you might learn a thing, and you started with a basic plan, but you're getting a different iteration. It's almost like the way viruses evolve. Like, they screw every 20 minutes and they have an offspring every 20 minutes. So they're having they have 40 million generations to our one.
And one of those mutations happens to be the most efficient for the environment. And I don't think you begin there. I haven't, certainly. Do you pull from other industries or other disciplines when it comes to how you curate your content?
Oh, absolutely. You know who I even study? And when I tune into these church live streams, I'm trying to get some positivity. I'm trying to get some hope. I'm trying to, it's a good thing to do with the family on Sunday. But I'm also looking at their tech. I'm just like, bro, I don't know if you've seen, but go on YouTube and just type in like church live stream, like Second Baptist or Lakewood or whatever. And you'll see the little Zoom choir. Like, it's just like 50 faces. And I thought about the lag. I thought about, what if someone has bad Wi-Fi? I thought about the quality of their microphone on their end. I thought about like, do they have headphones?
Right.
And they're all on beat. So the church tech teams are in demand. They're top notch.
Do you pull from other industries like that frequently? Do you research other industries and look at what things outside of stand-up and hip-hop are doing?
Absolutely. I'll give you one example. Well, for one, once I realized that hip hop was like WrestleMania, I was like, oh, okay. Because, I'm a college student. Like I'm a college boy. Like I read books and shit. And you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. You look at data.
Like you're not a gangster. And at the time, everybody in rap had this gangster persona. So I'm like, I'm not going to do gangster shit. I'm going to like do like some Humpty Hump, Biz Markie, Slick Rick, Andre 3000 when he was wearing football pads and wigs. Like, example of another industry that I used the WrestleMania thing and my mind went that way.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a lady from Mexico that my daughter watches, my little bitty daughter watches. She's not even 2 yet. And she has the merchandise. It's this lady from Mexico, and they sing, they do skits, they do like all kid stuff. So this lady has been around probably at least 20 years, right? She's been on everything from her own local TV show in Monterrey, Mexico. But here's the thing. Her career probably went up and down. Kids grow up. You get a new generation of kids or whatever. But YouTube is where she made her resurgence. So first it was kind of like, oh, hey, Belly, you still doing that children's thing? And then it's like, oh, hey, I hear you're touring. Dude, she comes to Houston. She does bigger venues than me. She's doing, in my hometown, she's doing, I believe, the Arena Theater. And she has like this whole cast of like, they come out in costumes and they dance and stuff. And I look at her social media. I'm like, oh, she's live streaming. She's got a blue screen. She has one of the characters go live and all the kids are calling in like Instagram live. So my daughter's not even 2 and my wife is like holding up the phone and my daughter's just like, oh, Beto. Like she's like, this is the people.
And when you capture them that young, I guess they stay fans for ever, right? And I think about it right now. There's a guy on he's on my Facebook page, Mark Kistler, who when I was a kid, I used to watch, I think it came on PBS. There was a TV show called Secret City. And as a young fledgling wannabe artist, I would watch this. This guy would draw these whimsical fun. It was a how-to draw.
Do you have a mustache and like a little fro?
Yeah. Might be, yeah.
He used to draw like 3D things, like tubes and
yes. That's Mark Kistler. Yeah, Commander Mark was his name, and he used to have the pins in his jumpsuit pockets. And that dude, when I was a kid, was so influential to my artistic development. And years later, man, I'm talking that had to have been 35 something years ago. And during this pandemic, he's hosting these live drawing classes. And I'll be damned if 40 years later, I'm not just as big a fan as childhood me. I harp on this a lot, but we are doing the same thing, no matter what you're doing. Why is that important? Because it opens you up to all kinds of influence. In comedy, originality is not just important, it's all 10 commandments. But even with that holy tenet, there is room for influence. Chris Rock is a lot of Eddie Murphy, is a lot of Richard Pryor. There's a lot of Richard and Dave Chappelle too. But there's also a lot of other things in those guys. Rhythm and stage presence, pacing, timing, discipline, self-management. These things can be just as easily borrowed from Broadway or rock and roll or television dramas. I asked Chingo what he borrows from other arenas, which led us into a long conversation about how to apply all of it to building a set.
Well, I'm gonna bring it back to the artist. What's his name? Commander Mark.
Oh yeah, Mark Kistler.
So one of the things I kind of remember he would talk about, and even like Bob Ross, which is basically like being gentle with yourself in terms of like don't self-edit too harshly. Like don't get in your head. And I mean I know I be having anxiety, so I ain't never been diagnosed, but it's easy to get in my head. So I have to make it like a 24-hour job of just being mindful of stress levels, like just mitigating stress, managing stress. Okay, how are you relaxing? Can you relax more? You know what I'm saying?
How do you, at what point do you stop yourself and you go, man, you're doing good work here. This is, just let it be what it is.
And I try to apply it to my stand-up as well. So, for example, writing a short story is going to be a lot less intimidating than a feature film, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, with a poem or a short story or something small like a rap verse, when you complete it, you get that little dopamine hit of like, I'm done.
Yes.
I recorded it. I did the ad libs. Like, it's like the cherry on top. It's like I cooked the recipe. I'm going to upload it. People are going to eat. So basically, when it comes to self-editing, it's almost like lower the bar in a sense, like kind of go in knowing that like, I'll relate it back to comedy. So for example, thankfully I had a long music background. I had an extensive just banging your head up against the wall and just experience of like, knowing what it's like to just be like, you know, after a show, people being like, yo, we're going to go party, we're going to go drink. And they'd be like, fuck yeah. And, you know, we're going to socialize. And, we were just young and we weren't as efficient with our energy. You know, we're dehydrated at the airport the next morning. And, you didn't prioritize sleep. How's your immune system? Have you taken some prebiotics? This is 40-year-old Chingo, right? So the way I approach some of my material is kind of like, all right. I know from my rap days that when you make a mixtape, some tracks are going to be, it might just be a minute long. Fuck it. It's an intermission. Some might be just a funny interlude. It might be a skit. But you might want to end with a bang, like so on and so forth, to where you start to think in terms of like jokes. It's kind of like, all right, well, this is a simple idea that's probably a dumb one-liner, but I know how I can use it. It's going to keep people's attention. Oh, this one has more meat to it, or sprinkle this in because it's relevant, it's topical. You know, put that at the beginning.
And you sort of build the set that, well, all right, man, I've got 3 or 4 big signature chunky 7-minute stories, and then I've got these little
baked things.
Yeah, these little loose ideas and these various things. I want to talk about your stand-up specifically. One of the things I've noted, and I may be completely wrong here, I haven't seen you on stage in a minute, but you talk thematically. Not that you don't deal with politics at all, but you don't deal with, you know, I'm going to go up here and talk about specific politicians, or I'm going to talk about this. You sort of approach issues and things with a broad brush. And I'm sure that's a conscious choice, but kind of talk about how you ended up with this Chingo Bling on stage in terms of material choice.
What I try to do is I just kind of keep my antennas open in terms of like topics. Like, let's just say I want to be writing about relationships. Pretend I'm trying to observe couples and I'm thinking of like, how do people argue during quarantine or whatever, or interaction with my wife. Then my antennas are up. And as life is happening, as I'm better now at keeping balance between living life and talking about shit in the world. So, you know, again, this is 40-year-old Chingo. So that's kind of how I approach it, is like, I make sure I try to have some kind of balance. I make sure that I'm actually experiencing stuff so that I kind of can relate to motherfuckers and I know what's going on and I'm living and I'm tied to my material. Like, I could perform it so much better if I like lived it and the shit is true. And I know it's funny because everyone fucking laughed, everyone that was there type of thing. And I've already tweaked the story and condensed it to where it's 10 times funnier. And one thing that really helps me is editing, meaning tweaking. Like, okay, yeah, it sucked the first 5 times you told it, but there's that one piece you stumbled across and you tightened it and you rearranged this and you took that out.
What is that edit process? So when you do a show, do you tape every show?
I try to at least record audio, at the very least.
And then what is the because I struggle with this immensely. I record all of them audio wise, all of them with the intention of, I'm going to dissect this, I'm going to dig through it, and I do. But what happens more often is I just sort of let it run in the background and I make a mental note afterwards. I'm like, man, some really cool stuff happened that show. I got on this improvisational riff after a new bit and I wrote 2 or 3 new lines to it. I have no idea what they are, but I know they're on there somewhere. It's more of a back. It's almost like running a security cam for me, where I don't check it anymore until something happened. Versus the old me that used to, and I was fanatical about videotaping sets, coming home, popping that tape in the VCR, sitting there with a notebook, line by line, writing everything out. That's changed for me. Do you still have that sort of same editing hunger?
Well, I would say that because I have like a lot of new stuff that I was in the process of like slowly, like kind of bit by bit, like chunk by chunk, starting to kind of work it in so that it was slowly starting to phase out weaker,
Right.
older, stale stuff. So because I'm going to be back in that mode whenever this blows over, I'm definitely going to have to really rely on tape, whether it's audio or video, to really just check, just really like observe, like, okay, that didn't work. Why did you say it like that? Take that word out.
What was I thinking?
Yeah. But the cool thing is that what you just mentioned about improving and riffing, man, I wish I knew what percentage of my set that like tags and jokes, what percentage of that
was written on stage?
Was written on stage.
100%. Dude, it is my, and I don't know if this is indicative of anybody else other than myself. It's very good to hear you say that, because I will get a loose idea, mainly because I'm more story form. So I go, all right, cool. I know this thing has a punchline. I know I have an out. Let me just get up and talk. And there's something about the mindset I have when I'm on stage. It's like when I'm sitting here with a notebook and I'm like, I'm going to write jokes. This monster just jumps up between me and the page and goes, no, you're not. No, you're not. Try and get that out of your head. On stage, that block is gone. And I'm allowed to just free spit stuff out. And maybe that's the survivalist in me on stage. Says, oh, if I don't get a laugh real quick, I'm going to die up here.
Yeah. And one thing too, that I find is that, even when something is like, it's funny on paper, but it's like, yeah, but the way you're saying it, like sometimes you just have to have so much confidence in the material, in the joke. Like you have to believe it. And you know what, man? A lot of times my acting classes play a big role in my stand-up. Like a lot of times I have to rely on some of my other strengths of just kind of knowing, like sprinkling in, like I'm not the best public speaker in the world, but I know a couple things about it, or,
right.
You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not the best comedian, but I know I have some experience. Like when you put it all together, that's where that survival mode comes in and you're able to jujitsu or like power through.
Well, because your other strengths sort of I know where I'm deficient as a joke writer, but I also know that I can convince you they're better than they are. You mentioned the acting thing. I think one of the things to stand up is that these patterns and the rhythms that we establish on stage. It's the reason rule of 3 works. That's the shortest pattern you can establish and break. And with us, as we sort of go up there and do what we do, what I've learned is that when you establish the pattern of stand-up comedy, this is what my rhythm is. I tend to build tension and break it, and build tension and break it. And if you looked at everybody's show, those waves would look different. They're faster for some and longer for some. But I found that you can almost drop something that isn't a punchline in a place where a punchline goes. And if you've got the crowd in enough of a rhythm, they'll laugh anyway. And it's the weirdest damn thing I've ever seen in my life, that you can elicit a laugh based on it going where a laugh should go and zero to do with the words that are actually said.
Yeah, you know what, a trippy thing, one of my theories is that good comics, the ones that really know how, like what you just described,
mm-hmm.
when you can pace the crowd and put them into a trance to where your timing and your rhythm still create the laugh, because you already what's the word I'm looking for? You already established rapport.
Mm-hmm.
Like you already got them on your side, and then you're taking them for a ride. They're already buying what you're selling.
You ever play the game with your kids where you go and they go and you go and then the third time you go and they go and you go, damn, like that's kind of what you can do with the crowd, just with rhythm.
Yeah, and just like everything, like timing and making sure you've got them on your side first, like in the beginning, like just initiating, like you're in control, the attitude, the confidence, whatever the persona is, that I don't give a damn. Is it the frustrated dad? Is it, is it the whatever your persona is, establishing all that in the beginning. Like speaking of church YouTube streams, okay? Somehow dude, it's the quarantine and you just don't be having shit to do. And it's like, all right, it's Sunday. We put one on. The algorithm started playing like some other preacher, right? And it was like a young black dude dressed super hip. He had almost like the Gumby haircut, and he would do like this one little ad lib in the middle of his sermon that was like a Kanye. He's like, and something, but a lot of these ministers are Toys R Us ministers, and they not ready to grow up. See, y'all not. And I was like, yo, this dude, he's killing it. And then he walked over to the drums and I was like, okay, now he's a prop minister now. and then it started playing this other dude, like this young hip white dude that was like dressed all like Urban Outfitters, like super young, accessorized, slick hair. And he's got a huge congregation and he's up there. And I noticed that he was kind of improvising and riffing in the beginning. So he's like, I just want to give a big shout out to our technical team. As you can see the screens behind me, just switch all the angles. But like switch all the angles. And the dude's like, boom, 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 switching angles. Boom, 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 boom. And then he's like, so basically he cracked a couple jokes and then he goes into his material.
Chingo really doesn't seem to see a difference between what he and that preacher are doing. And why should he? Preachers and comedians and musicians, for that matter, we're all just sort of cheerleaders in a way. Conductors of orchestras made up of people who want to take part in an emotional experience. It's our job to give them that. We shift gears to talk about comedy in Mexico and Mexican comedy, and what can be learned from the difference between the two.
In Mexico, like the vaudeville, like it would be called las carpas, which was tents, the tents. So it was like a traveling, almost like a circus, but it was entertainment. It was shows, it was comedy, it was drama, it was acting. So you probably had it was like they'd go into these rural communities the same way a lot of these preachers would do, like these Southern Baptist rattlesnake.
Yes,
it was like a revival, and they're coming in because there ain't shit to do.
Right.
So anyway, Las Carpas is where a lot of iconic, like Mexican Hollywood people got their start. It was like the Comedy Store before there was even a comedy club. So they were just traveling in tents or it would be just in the city.
Right.
But people would go, this is before they were able to see it on theater, on stage and all that.
What is, because in some of, I learned that down in Peru, I remember talking to a friend of mine, and he was explaining how Peru doesn't have a stand-up comedy scene at all. A lot of Latin America and South America specifically. I guess Mexico is, because of its proximity to America, has stand-up comedy solidified its existence in Mexico now?
Like, I know Comedy Central has set up shop. They have an office in Mexico City, Netflix, Mexico. A lot of these dudes have specials out there, and I've experienced firsthand. So I actually participated in 2 shows in Mexico. One was in Monterrey, Mexico, and the next day was in Saltillo. We go do the show, right? It's in Spanish. And I noticed that I did a 10-minute set. I noticed that this whole right side of the room, they're just kind of like filming me, but not laughing. So I'm like, what the hell's going on? I think I'm bombing. I get off. They send like a couple representatives from that side. They come over. And I was like, fuck, dude, these people hate me. And they're like, what's up, Chingo? We're from Dallas. When are you going to do a show in English? I thought it was going to be in English. I'm like, we're in Mexico. I'm like, what are you talking about? I was like, so you're from Dallas. You're here on vacation. They're like, no, we got deported. And I was like, all of y'all? Wow. They're like, yeah, it's a big community of Americans. Well, they're Mexicans, obviously. Right. But they grew up in America, somehow got deported. And they start a new life. They work at call centers and stuff like that, or like hotels or tourism and stuff like that, where they're bilingual. So
the concept, I speak like just enough to survive in Latin America if I had to. It's not as simple as just translating a joke, because to me, the words are so important in English. The word choice, the fact that k sounds or what certain letters or certain words or certain phrases in English are so important. And when you change them to Spanish, the translation is not, it's like translating a song even. There's so much lost in that.
Bro,
What do you do?
there's so much lost in translation, like cultural things. So, I got the joke about my wife gave birth in the house with no epidural, and we had a midwife. And it's like usually one of my closers when I do comedy in the States. When I do an hour, it's usually towards the end. It's a story. It has a lot of laughs, a lot of little plot twists. Well, in Mexico, there's a part in the joke where it's like, what if my sister-in-law finds out and we're in the birth and then there's a DJ and he's got someone's kids. We can't have a bunch of people here because there's a bunch of kids jumping in the birth pool and blah, 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 right? Over there, they're like, what's wrong with having your family?
There were 12 people at my birth.
Yeah, so I'm like, and then someone's kids jump in the birth pool and they're like, so
where's the comedy? We're waiting on the funny part.
Yeah, so I don't hear anything absurd, anything ironic. So I realized, man, like I had some cousins show up to the show in Saltillo, and literally we went to hang out afterwards, and they were just like, so the thing about the birth, like, never mind, man.
So you do put your toe into the pool of stereotypes or archetypes or generalizations or however you want to put it. Are there benefits to stereotypes?
Well, yeah. So here's why I draw, I guess here's the fine line. I think there's two things. I think one thing is a stereotype, which in essence is hacky.
Of course.
It's lazy and it's just dated and it's just not that accurate. And then there's the other flip side of the coin where it's like, imagine like Mexican Twitter and there's just a meme that just goes viral on Mexican Twitter. Is everyone sharing it because it's a stereotype? No, they're sharing it because it's like somehow relatable, authentic, and maybe there's some nuance in there where people know, okay, the words he's using and the way he's saying it, his family must be where my family's from, or like my uncle, my uncle must hang out with his uncle, or like my dad reminds me of that, or I think I've heard my grandmother say that. There's something very authentic about it to where it's not a stereotype. Then it's just like, nah, man, that's just true.
I think the line between being satirical and being just full-blown racist and offensive, you got to find that thing. You don't ever want to be on the other side of that thing. But on the way to that line, there's so much to be addressed there, and it doesn't have to be, I guess, offensive. Like when I talk about myself, when I'm doing my show, it's very specific to me. It's about the more specific I am, the more the audience find themselves in it, the way you did. And I think it's sort of, if you throw all those little details away, if you don't lean into all of the inherently Mexican things in a Mexican household, if you shove those off to the side just because you don't want anybody to feel like you're being stereotypical, I think the joke loses all of its soul and flavor. And I think those things are important, specifically coming from people who are inside of the stereotype.
Yeah. So like one thing I noticed is that for the most part, my crowd is mostly Mexican American by far. However, a lot of times what we see at the shows is like some nights are like pretty diverse for whatever reason. People from work and, they brought their mother-in-law. It's just diverse. So I know that one improvement I've definitely made as a comic, just as I gain experience and confidence, is that I make sure that, all the new material, yeah, it might be peppered with a few little sprinkles of like, oh, there's that one little tag, whatever. But for the most part, like I make sure that material wise, it's relatable. And I picture like people watching a sitcom, and I want them to be able to hear the story, hear the joke, get why it's funny, get why it's ironic, get why it's absurd, picture it, visualize the characters, feel like they're real characters. And it doesn't have to be so like, orale, it's Latino night. What's up, man? Fucking Vicks Vapor Rub, right? We don't get Corona, fool. Why, dog? Because of Vicks and Sprite. 7 Up, right? Hey, this guy knows what I'm talking about. With the Corona, right? Modelo. It's like, no. Nah, man. Don't expect that.
More than any of the things we've discussed, Chingo is a businessman, a strategist, someone who understands that most of the rules are the same no matter what you're playing. It gives you a huge leg up once you realize this. I've used storytelling in the past as an example of something that translates between mediums, but other skills apply just as easily. Tension, timing, I'm trying to think of another T word, tech. Figuring out what else you're already qualified to do can keep you ahead of an industry that can literally change overnight. What is Chingo's parting advice to comedians, if there's something to be taken from what he's learned along the way?
So I think, as we touched earlier about like what other worlds or industries do you get inspiration from? I tell my comedy friends all the time, like especially ones I tour with, because we're at the IHOP after the show, or we're in the hotel room, hanging out, and I always preach the same type of stuff. I feel like from a business standpoint, a lot of comics can benefit from making like peep your perspective, like figure out what how you're approaching this game. Like for instance, so that you do the game and the game don't do you. So that you have some kind of systems in place, and think about what your exit plan is, because what happens is everybody wants to get in the game, but they don't think about how they're gonna get out the game. And you see that in whether it's the drug world or the rap world, where it's like, man, I just want to get in the game, man. I just want to be the man. And it's like, okay, how are you gonna navigate when you have a target on your back and you are the man?
Okay, not to totally change lanes, but while you're giving advice, what is a book that has changed your life?
All right, man. Perfect segue. Well, I have a couple books that have changed my life. I would say if I had to narrow it down to one book, I'd have to say The War of Art. Not the Art of War. That Art of War is some other shit.
Stephen Pressfield.
Yes. Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art. You can read it in an afternoon. It's super short. He basically explains to you like how so many people are suffering because of this unlived life, like this project, this thing, I want to get into stand-up, but I'm scared. All those things that we put off, because that's literally what I did. I put off stand-up for over a decade, for many, many years. But it teaches you there's a thing called the resistance, where you've read it, right, Slade?
Matter of fact, I was going to ask you if I was the one who recommended that to you. It is the book I have given away more copies of than I couldn't even tell you. Charlie Murphy, the amount of people I've given that book to, it is the single greatest weapon I have in terms of it is an incredibly easy read. I think the first time I read it in a bookstore coffee shop. I didn't even buy it. And then I went back and I ordered a couple of copies of it. I always have a copy on me. I give them to everybody. The way he talks about resistance, that thing, and if you haven't read the book, do it. But if you have, you'll understand the part I'm talking about. When we sit down to create anything, whatever that is, man. If you go into the podcast studio, if I sit down with a notebook, resistance is all of those things you try to do instead of that thing. When the YouTube rabbit holes and all right, well, let me just make one more pot of coffee. Let me make this phone call before I actually crack into the Word document. Those are the things we have to overcome. And that book single-handedly explains it better.
Yeah, it's a powerful book.
I don't want to dwell too much on the book. This isn't a commercial for Stephen Pressfield. The book is, however, if you're actively interested in getting out of your own way, a must-read. Hopefully you've taken away from this conversation the same things I did, that we're all a bit more skilled across disciplines than we thought. Now that I'm thinking that way, I'm eager to see what new things I start to notice and what might already be sitting unused in my tool chest. Follow Chingo Bling on all things social media at Chingo Bling. and download his latest release, El Versace Mariachi, wherever you get your albums. Eyes on the Ground is produced by me, Slade Ham. Additional production and music provided by Brian Carrion. To support future projects like this, please consider contributing to my Patreon or subscribing to me on all things social media at Slade Ham. SLADEHAM.